The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of Mark's cabin as he stoked the dying embers of his fireplace. The snowstorm had been raging for hours, trapping him in his small, remote home deep in the Montana wilderness. He took a sip of coffee, staring at the swirling frost against the glass, lost in thought. Then he heard it, a faint scratching sound. Mark's brows furrowed. He set down his mug and listened carefully. At first, he thought it was the wind shifting the snowdrifts outside, but then, there it was again. A weak, desperate scratching against his front door, followed by a barely audible whimper. His pulse quickened. Living in isolation, he had dealt with his fair share of wildlife encounters, wandering deer, the occasional wolf in search of food. But this was different. This was deliberate. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his boots creaking against the wooden floor. He reached for the flashlight near the door and flicked it on, hesitating before gripping the handle. What if it was a predator? A starving wolf pushed too far by the cold? The scratching came again, more urgent this time, and then a sound that made his stomach clench. A whimper, not just one, two. Mark's hand tightened around the doorknob. Against his better judgment, he cracked the door open. A blast of icy wind rushed inside, stinging his face, but his breath hitched at the sight before him. A German shepherd stood in the snow, trembling violently, her ribs visible beneath her frost-covered fur. Her legs wobbled, barely holding her weight. But it wasn't just her. Pressed against her shivering body were two tiny puppies, barely moving beneath the thick snow piling around them. Mark's chest tightened. The mother dog's amber eyes locked onto his, filled with something he couldn't quite describe. Fear, desperation, and trust. She wasn't trying to attack. She wasn't barking or growling. She was begging. For a moment, he stood frozen, torn between logic and instinct. Letting them inside meant bringing in possible trouble, disease, injuries, maybe worse. But leaving them out there? They wouldn't survive the night. The mother dog let out a soft, pleading whimper. Snow clung to her fur, her breath forming weak clouds in the freezing air. One of the puppies stirred slightly, then went still again. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. If he didn't act now, they wouldn't make it. Without another thought, he yanked the door open and stepped forward. "Come on, girl," he said, crouching low, his voice softer now. "Let's get you inside." For a split second, she hesitated, glancing back at her pups as if weighing her choices. Then, slowly, she nudged one of them forward with her nose, stepping over the threshold into the warmth. Mark scooped up the second puppy, cradling its frail, freezing body in his hands. Its breathing was shallow, too shallow. As soon as they were inside, he kicked the door shut, shutting out the storm. But as the German shepherd collapsed onto the wooden floor, curling protectively around her pups, he realized the real fight was just beginning. The warmth of the cabin hit the German shepherd like a wave, and her trembling intensified. Mark had seen it before, cold shock. The sudden change in temperature was jarring, and her exhausted body was struggling to adjust. She curled tightly around her two pups, nudging them closer to her belly, shielding them from the unfamiliar space. Mark knelt beside them, his breath unsteady. The pups were barely moving. He reached out slowly, but the mother let out a low, warning growl. Not aggressive, just cautious. Protective. "Easy, girl," Mark murmured, pulling back his hand. "I just want to help." She didn't take her eyes off him, but after a few tense moments, she lowered her head, resting her chin over her pups as if trying to keep them warm. Mark stood and hurried to the kitchen, grabbing an old towel from the drawer. When he returned, he carefully placed it near the mother and her puppies. She stiffened, but didn't move away. He grabbed a second towel and rubbed his hands together, then reached for one of the pups, slowly, deliberately. The mother let out another low whimper, but didn't stop him. The moment his fingers touched the pup's tiny body, Mark's stomach dropped. Cold, too cold. He gently wrapped the small bundle in the towel, rubbing its fur to create friction, praying for movement. Nothing. "Come on, little guy," he whispered, rubbing a little harder. Stay with me. A few agonizing seconds passed. Then, the pup's tiny body twitched. Mark exhaled, his shoulders sagging in relief. It was weak, but it was something. The mother dog whined, inching closer, watching his every move. She nudged the second pup with her nose, letting out a soft, desperate cry. Mark swallowed hard and scooped up the second one, repeating the process. It was slightly more responsive than its sibling, but still dangerously weak. All right, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. We need to get you all warm, fast. Mark turned his attention back to the German shepherd. Now that they were inside, he could see just how bad her condition was. Her ribs pressed sharply against her thin coat. Her once beautiful fur was matted with ice, patches of it missing. Her paws were raw, her nose cracked from the cold. She had been out there for a long time, and yet, despite her own suffering, she had fought her way through the storm for her pups. Mark clenched his jaw. He had seen bravery in his life. As a firefighter, he had watched men and women walk into burning buildings, risking everything to save others. And now, here she was, a mother, barely clinging to life herself, refusing to give up. You're a damn warrior, Mark muttered. The mother dog looked up at him, her amber eyes tired but unwavering. He reached for a bowl, filling it with lukewarm water, not hot. He knew rapid heating could shock her system. Carefully, he slid it toward her. She eyed it suspiciously at first. Then, when she realized there was no threat, she drank. Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They weren't out of danger yet, but at least now they had a fighting chance. The storm had finally started to die down outside, but inside the cabin, the real battle was just beginning. Mark sat near the fireplace, watching the mother dog closely. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she refused to sleep. Not until she knew her pups were safe. The puppies stirred weakly, their tiny bodies now warmer, but still far from strong. Mark knew they needed food soon, or they wouldn't make it. He stood and rummaged through his cabinets. No dog food. He hadn't owned a pet in years. All right, let's improvise, he muttered. He grabbed a can of chicken broth and poured some into a shallow bowl, diluting it with warm water. It wasn't ideal, but it would help rehydrate her. Slowly, he placed the bowl near the mother dog. She sniffed the liquid cautiously, then lapped it up, drinking every drop. Mark exhaled in relief. That's a start. Now, there was one question gnawing at him. Where had she come from? She wasn't just a stray, she had a past. As the fire crackled, Mark's eyes drifted to her neck. Something was there, a faint outline where a collar used to be. His stomach tightened. Someone had owned her, and they had either lost her or abandoned her. Mark's jaw clenched. He had seen too many cases of neglect, people dumping their pets like trash, leaving them to fend for themselves. But something about this dog. She wasn't just wandering. She had fought through a deadly storm to protect her pups. She wasn't lost. She had been running. From what? Or worse, from who? Mark reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts. The nearest town was small, but they had an animal shelter. He called. Hey, this is Mark. I found a dog. A German shepherd, female, with 2 pups. She's in rough shape. The woman on the other end hesitated. A shepherd, you said? Yeah, no collar, but she used to have one. There was a pause. You might want to bring her in, the woman said carefully. We've had reports. Mark's grip on the phone tightened. Reports? Of what? He looked at the mother dog, curled around her puppies, her tired eyes watching him. He already knew the answer. She had been running from something, and whatever it wasn't good. Mark's grip on the phone tightened as the shelter worker's words echoed in his mind. We've had reports. He glanced at the mother dog, curled protectively around her pups, her eyes still filled with exhaustion and something else, fear. Someone had hurt her. Someone had let her suffer in the cold. And now, they might be looking for her. Mark exhaled, his thoughts racing. Could he really just turn her over? Something in his gut told him that bringing her to the shelter wouldn't be as simple as finding her a new home. If she had escaped something terrible, was sending her back into the system the right call? The next morning, Mark wrapped the pups in a warm towel, secured them in a crate, and helped the mother dog into the truck. She hesitated at first, whining softly, her paws resisting the motion of being lifted. But when she saw Mark wasn't forcing her, just guiding her, she allowed him to help. She was beginning to trust him. The drive to the shelter was quiet. The storm had left a fresh blanket of snow across the roads, the town still waking up from the harsh night before. When Mark pulled into the small shelter parking lot, a woman in a heavy coat stepped outside, watching him carefully. "You're the one who called?" she asked, stepping forward. Mark nodded. "Yeah." She showed up at my door with her pups in the middle of the storm. The woman knelt, her face instantly softening as she saw the German shepherd. "Oh, you poor girl," she murmured. The mother dog pressed back against Mark's leg, her tail low, her body tensed. That was all the confirmation he needed. She was scared. "What's going on?" Mark asked, his voice edged with suspicion. The shelter worker sighed. "We've been hearing about a breeder, an illegal one, keeping dogs in horrible conditions. When they stop being profitable, they dump them. A few locals reported seeing a shepherd running through the woods a few days ago, but no one could catch her." Mark's fists clenched. They had thrown her away, with her puppies, left her to die in the storm. The mother dog looked up at him, her amber eyes searching his. She hadn't been running from home. She had been escaping hell. The shelter worker stood up. "If you want, we can take her in. We'll do our best to find her a good home." Mark swallowed, glancing down at the mother dog. She had risked everything to keep her puppies alive. She had fought through the cold with nothing but determination and love to guide her. And now she was pressing against him, choosing him. Mark knew what he had to do. "She already found one," he said firmly. The shelter worker blinked. "What?" Mark crouched beside the German shepherd, running a hand through her fur. "She's staying with me." For the first time since she had arrived at his doorstep, her tail wagged. The days turned into weeks. Mark named her Storm, after the night she had braved to protect her family. Her pups, Blizzard and Ember, grew stronger by the day, playing in the warmth of the cabin instead of shivering in the snow. Storm no longer flinched when Mark moved too quickly. She no longer watched the door as if expecting someone to take her away, because she knew she was home, forever. What would you have done in Jack's place? Would you have opened the door for Grace and her pups? Let us know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, show your support. Like this video to spread awareness, share it with someone who loves incredible rescue stories, and subscribe for more inspiring tales of survival, courage, and second chances. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a heartwarming rescue story. Together, we can make a difference. One story at a time. Love Dogfire.